Welcome to On the Chain. This is Jeff here with co-host Chip. What is going on, everybody? What's going on, Chip? We have an exciting show today. As promised, we have the original sponsor of the Token Taxonomy Act, Congressman Warren Davidson's here with us today, and we are excited to talk to him about crypto. So if you guys are ready, I'm ready. Chip, you ready to kick this thing off?
Let's go.
Welcome to On the Chain.
Without further ado, let's bring in Rep. Warren Davidson. Welcome to On the Chain. Great to have you here. Great to have you back.
Yeah, and really nice to join you. Thanks for the invite. Love your show.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and so I thought what we'd do, just to kind of set the stage here, is about, I think it was almost 2 weeks ago, you had the House Financial Services Committee hearing oversight on the SEC. Wanted to play just a montage of you with Chair Gensler. Let's do this. There we go.
Chairman Gensler, in advance of today's hearing, did you coordinate acceptable responses with Senator Elizabeth Warren?
No, I'm speaking on my own behalf.
Did you coordinate with Democratic staff? And I ask because it happened before, and I want to be clear whether you operate of your own accord or whether there's some sort of coordinated approach to the damage that you're inflicting on America's capital markets.
I'm here as sitting in my role as chair of the agency, but I speak.
What about Ethereum? Is Ethereum now a security?
We had this.
I heard your exchange. They've been in place since 2015. You say in your statements that there's clarity in the market and the rules are clear. Just come on in. You can't even answer the question. Do you say XRP is a security?
Well, we're in court and active discussions and litigation on that matter.
You're in litigation because you do say it's a security. You have essentially a Hotel California rule for crypto where you can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave. You have endless discovery with no resolution and no clarity for the captives in the market. You have high staff turnover, unhappy people leaving your office, and unhappy companies and capital leaving our country.
There you have it.
That was
Powerful.
outstanding.
Powerful. I think, I believe you did it. You only have 5 minutes, right? You have 5 minutes to be able to get those thoughts down. It was really well coordinated. What's your thoughts on Gary Gensler as the chair of the SEC, regulating by enforcement?
Yeah, I think it comes through. I'm not real happy with Gary Gensler, and part of that exchange was highlighting that I'm working to, frankly, eliminate his role and restructure the SEC. I think Gary Gensler has undermined the SEC, and the solution is to restructure it and, frankly, go back to what it is supposed to be. There's a commission for a reason. So you either need a out of control chairman like Gary Gensler, who front runs everyone, and you could eliminate 5 commissioners, or you need to actually let it be a commission, which is what it was originally designed to do. So essentially, I'm saying I think it was a mistake to go with this strong chairman, and it might have not been totally obvious how bad the mistake was until Gary Gensler, because he's just running roughshod over everything. And Hester Peirce has been great as a commissioner, and you like to think that if it was more collegial and collaborative, voices of reason would prevail.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It sounds like, well, he wouldn't answer any of the questions. That was the other part of it too. I mean, really throughout the entire hearing, one side seemed a little bit more favorable than maybe the other side as well. But I think that this anti-crypto sentiment on, especially with what we refer to him as the blue team here, especially with how do you approach when you have Senator Warren, we have Brad Sherman, who are leading this anti-crypto war, which is completely opposite of what's happening with the red team, right? The Republican side.
Yeah, Republicans have not uniformly embraced it. I've got colleagues that are, probably as opposed to crypto in any form as Brad Sherman is. But as a party, broadly, the GOP in the House anyway has embraced it. And the same, there are Democrats who are at least in the same range as pro crypto as I am, but they're more junior and they're in a structure where they're not really free to operate and support those bills. there's a lot of pressure in any committee to, support whatever call the chairman or the ranking member, the leader of your party supports. And the reality is Elizabeth Warren is really driving financial services in this space. She's amassed an enormous amount of power over this financial services space, and she's doing it without legislation. I mean, there hasn't been a single bill on any subject that's passed the Senate Banking Committee since December 5th of 2017. So Democrats have chaired that committee since 2019. Sherrod Brown, my senator, Senate Banking, he's hard to pin down. He'll say things that are moderately, receptive to something reasonable. But at the end of the day, I think he just goes back and checks with Elizabeth Warren and, I'm not allowed to bring that up either. I mean, we've got bills that are 100% Democrat support, 50% Republican support. They still don't go through that committee in the Senate. And then because of the influence of the Senate in appointees, Elizabeth Warren's kind of given direction to who gets appointed and confirmed in all sorts of agencies.
That's really interesting because, as we saw, the structure, even with the Financial Services Committee within the House, when it was led by Maxine Waters, she always seemed to be a major roadblock. But talking about kind of your experience now today, how have things changed since you originally sponsored the Token Taxonomy Act? So if we go back, I think your original sponsor was 2018.
Yeah, so I got elected to Congress in a special election. Speaker Boehner was my predecessor, actually. So he resigned, and there was still a portion of his term left over at the end of 2016. And so I came in and wasn't initially on financial services, and it's considered an A committee, one of the top committees. So I started networking to try to get on financial services, and so in January of 17, I became a member of that committee. And we had no focus on digital assets whatsoever. I started, pushing to say, hey, we should actually have hearings on this. And if you remember in 17, that's when the ICO market was really hot. There were really cool use cases launching, but there was frankly just some really scammy crap that was going on out there. And it seemed like the SEC didn't know what to do about it. So it's like, why don't we have hearings? And we couldn't get hearings to speak of. As a junior member, you don't get to convene hearings. So that continued on into 2018, and we still had no hearing of substance on it. We had some meetings trying to explain to people what it was, but we didn't have full hearings. So I said, well, I can't necessarily have a hearing as a junior member, but I can have a meeting. So we said, let's get a group of people together at the Library of Congress and talk about it. And, the goal was to get, a dozen, maybe two dozen people together. And we had to cap it at 50, and people kept upping. Instead of sending a representative, they're like, well, hey, we'd like to get our general counsel. And then if this company, word was their general counsel was coming, well, we want to send our CEO. So it really came to be, I think 11 o'clock at night, the night before the meeting in September, my staff guy for financial services was getting calls from people that felt really threatened. If you don't get my CEO in there, just all kinds of stuff. And it's like, if we let everyone come in, we wouldn't have been able to have the dialogue. So we had a really long open comment period, and there was a lot of appetite for it. So we really hit the timing, I think, well. If we could have been moving it through committee, we really could have. Think of all of the good that could have been done if in the end of 2018 or early 2019, we launched some regulation that provided clarity for the market. And that was the goal, just a bright line test to know what is a security and what is not. A way to deal with custody that's clear, and frankly, just a fundamental tax issue. When is it going to be treated as capital gains? It's not everything I would like. I don't really like capital gains in general, but the way they work on currency anyway, if you look at it at some of the digital assets, it's hard to treat it any one way. So we just treated it the same way as if you're going to Europe and you go into London initially and you get pound sterling, and then you go to Paris and you get euros, and then you come back to the U.S. As long as you didn't net a gain of more than $600, then you don't pay it. The European Union has since updated theirs to say 2,000. So we haven't updated the language, but those are the three things the bill does.
How do you think, and it's interesting too, had that presented back in 2018, like you said, that the climate would be a lot different. Now we have Chair Gensler, who's really taken about a whole different approach. So 2018, you were looking for a great way to boost innovation in this space. It seems like Chair Gensler and the blue team seem to be on the complete opposite side. I mean, are we reading it wrong? In the beginning, you had mentioned there's members out there, and I remember Darren Soto was there co-sponsoring the bill with you. We just don't hear from them, and it seems like the entire initiative of this administration, to Chair Gensler, to Elizabeth Warren, they just want to dismantle blockchain and crypto and push all that innovation offshore.
Yeah, I think they don't really want to push it offshore. They fundamentally want to kill it. And look, that's not everyone in the party, but everyone in the party seems to be going along with it at some level. I still have co-sponsors, but it's been, for new legislation, like Keep Your Coins Act, we haven't found a lot of enthusiasm for it. Thankfully, there's a solid block of Democrats who are also opposed to central bank digital currency. But the Biden administration is working on all this stuff. I mean, and not just any version of central bank digital currency, the same creepy surveillance state version China's doing. In fact, Maxine Waters had a hearing on central bank digital currencies and followed that hearing up with a hearing on nationalizing the credit ratings agencies so that we had a national credit score. The federal government is now the giver of your credit score. So without saying, gosh, we really envy the power of the Chinese Communist Party, they were essentially saying that. And, thankfully, not the whole party is there, but that's where a lot of the leadership of the Biden administration is. I mean, no one made Joe Biden nominate Omarova to be the communist banker in charge of the Office of Comptroller of Currency. That would have been a 180-degree difference from Brian Brooks, who was using that office, I think, rightly to provide some clarity, for things in that regulatory sphere of the OCC.
And you have tweeted quite a bit about the CBDC and the fact that it requires Congress. Congress has to get involved. It's not something that can be done with an executive order. It can't just be willed into happening. We have the Treasury, the Federal Reserve. They seem like they have this free reign, with no legislation at all, where they're starting to make decisions. Well, if you think about so what are some of the potential risks with this CBDCs, the central bank digital currency, in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think the real risk when you look, why has the, really bureaucracy, not just under one president or the other, but decided that they can just front run everybody. And I think that's what you see with Gary Gensler. He knows he doesn't really have the authority to do a lot of things, and he's just acting. There's, much was made of, I think Vice or some movie about Dick Cheney, where he was highlighting the concept of an Article 2 maximalist. Article 2 is the executive branch, and it basically says the executive branch can do whatever they want until the legislative branch or the judicial branch stops them. And that's not accurate. That's certainly not the intent of the Constitution, but it has kind of turned into the effect. And you see Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi giving speeches saying, the president doesn't have the authority to do, forgive student loans, for example, or stop evictions in America. And just by executive edict, you can say, no, you can't evict people out if they don't pay their rent. They tolerated that for a while. And eventually people said, okay, we're going to have to go to court over this. Biden doubled down on it, and it took the Supreme Court to literally say, actually, you don't have the authority to say you can't evict anybody. And you look at things that get a little hazier. One of the most important cases recently out of the Supreme Court was West Virginia versus the EPA. And the EPA decided that they wanted to start regulating carbon output. And, they made it clear, well, you don't actually have a law that says you should regulate carbon output. So your clean power plan idea is halted. It's stayed. You can't continue to move forward with enforcement on that. And the reality is the EPA is continuing to impose a lot of those standards that were drafted under the Clean Power Plan. So we haven't even fully resolved the implications of that specific to the EPA. But if you look at the logical conclusion of that for all these agencies, you do need legislation before you can act. But that hasn't stopped bureaucrats in a number of cases from just trying to move forward without it.
And that's a solid point. The unelected bureaucrat seem to be causing a lot of and wreaking havoc, within our political systems here, and trying to move us into this socialist construct which is, extremely dangerous, obviously. And so here's the question, and as you started talking about and introducing a bill to actually move Chair Gensler into a completely different position, even have Chair Gensler fired entirely. And thinking about with the EPA, how would you look at, and is there a possibility that we're going to see a shakeup of the unelected bureaucrats from the SEC to the EPA and beyond?
Yeah, so I think the bill that we're drafting eliminates the role of chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. So if we could pass that, there would be no role for Gary Gensler to show up to. He would be fired, not in a personalized sort of way. It's just, well, this job doesn't exist anymore, so stop coming here. And then you would make him ineligible to be hired by the Securities and Exchange Commission. No former director could be hired for the role. But the commissioners would go to parity, and that's what works on the Federal Election Commission. It keeps it collaborative. No one really tries to game it. If they need a law, they push for a law. They don't just, and that's where I looked at, I think the securities laws in the country should be politically neutral. There shouldn't be some radical agenda that one party or the other is trying to push into our capital markets. I mean, we've got a very mature set of capital markets, but there's a big void because some of the laws are very dated and hard to apply. And, there's a lot of pressure, frankly, on the Securities and Exchange Commission or others to act. And the real failure is Congress. Congress needs to pass the law. And a lot of times Congress doesn't want to. They don't want the responsibility or accountability. They want all the praise when everything works right, but they don't want any of the blame. And they don't want to cast recorded votes a lot of times. So I think if you get a neutral commission, it makes it clear, if you really want a major position, you need to come to Congress and put pressure on Congress to act. And I think some of the frustration directed at Jay Clayton and Gary Gensler really should be directed to Congress, because we could solve all this if we just passed a law that made it clear. And it's the same. I mean, if we want to regulate carbon for whatever reason, just because there's such a thing as carbon, or because it really is the key ingredient to man-made climate change, whatever position people land on in the debate, then if Congress chose to regulate it, then there could be a law on it. But you can't just say, hey, one person's going to impose their will on the whole country, or say a Federal Reserve chairman and board of governors isn't going to take our money system and turn it from store of value, means of payment, means of exchange system to some tool for coercion and control that's completely dystopian. I mean, that's what a central bank digital currency is. It's everywhere, whether it's fiction or scripture. The Book of Revelation I consider scripture. It's always depicted as evil when the money is corrupted into this tool for coercion and control. So why would our country even be working on it? Nevertheless, they are. I think the pressure has to be on Congress to rein in all these agencies. And one of the most important pieces of legislation in this did pass as part of the Republican debt ceiling fight. So we just said, yeah, we do agree we should raise the debt ceiling. We think we should start changing directions and lower spending down the road so that we don't default now or later. But one of the ways that we did that was not just the money that we spend, but all the strings attached to the money. And this is called the REINS Act, which would take major legislation. If there's a rulemaking that any of the agencies start to undertake and it has a major economic impact, I think defined as $100 million total impact in the economy, then Congress has to review the rule. So you could move forward with a rule if there was underlying legislation. But even if we passed a bill, let's say Dodd-Frank, there was a lot of things that the SEC actually needed to do when Congress passed the Dodd-Frank Act. But even when they finished the rulemaking, if it was going to be a major rule, then they would come back to Congress for approval before it could really take effect. That's the point of the REINS Act. So there are reforms like that are in the works. And I think it would just be incredible for our system of government if we actually did that and brought in the bureaucracy and frankly provided a meaningful check to the executive branch.
So one of the things you just brought up was when we think about Congress solving all this, I think some of the frustration with folks in the crypto community at large, the framers and the builders who put everything together in this country, they wanted to make it hard to put legislation through. They wanted there to be a lot of debate on it. I mean, it took 20 plus years to ratify the Constitution. People think it happened like in a session, but it started with the Federalist Papers all the way on through. But when you think about how difficult it is to put it through, like we just had Rep. Patrick McHenry said in the House Financial Services Committee, he's going to meet with the agriculture panel jointly in May to work on this crypto legislation. What does that look like? Because I know there's been some movement in the agricultural panel, as well as what we've seen with the House Financial Services. Do you think there's going to be a good sort of melding and come together as far as starting to lay this down? And are they looking at, honestly, what we've said here on the program, the token taxonomy is the best legislation that we've seen that has come out since. I know that there's been some other introductions. I know we had a senator introduce something, but I think still it's the most powerful legislation put forward.
Yeah, I certainly hope that we move forward with that. I think that'll be one of the components. We're trying to deal with the whole market structure in this hearing and with legislation. So token taxonomy would be one of the components of that. Before you regulate an exchange, you would want to be clear what is actually supposed to be on the exchange, what is a security, what is not. If you look at why is the House Financial Services Committee working with ag, most people would think of the Commodities Future Trading Commissions as a financial services organization. Nevertheless, ag is the committee that has jurisdiction over the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, because ag has commodities, but so does energy, and it's not in the Energy Committee. So it's sacred; it can't be changed. I've tried hard since I've been there because it would be rational. But that's one of the reasons why a lot of things you look like, why is this such a half measure, to be polite, instead of a whole solution to the problem? And we're trying to front run that and say, look, let's get in front of this and not have a set of rules that applies to some things but not others. Let's get a holistic solution to it. And so I think it's really good work by Chairman McHenry to get, and Chairman Thompson, GT Thompson, to get together and say, let's come up with one framework. It will be a little more tedious to kind of get to consensus, but I think to your point, once we get there, that ultimately did happen for the internet area in the 1996 Telecommunications Act. But that's also been hard to touch after it's passed. So I think that's why people are so gun shy about this, because once a major piece of legislation passes, it has historically proven hard to alter.
It's really great. This is a really interesting question. Maybe we don't have all the time to get into this one, but if you were to look forward, what do you believe that the blockchain tech and crypto, how can you combine this technology to actually improve government operation, transparency, and accountability at the government level?
Yeah, if you look at the concept of blockchain, so many people are focused on it as a payment system because Bitcoin initially started as a permissionless peer-to-peer payment system. If you read the white paper, but if you look at all the use cases that the underlying architecture of blockchain inspire, I mean, we're well into the internet era and we haven't even remotely tapped all the use cases yet. I think blockchain's similar. If you think about the idea of doing accounting in a blockchain sort of way, where there's a ledger that is unalterable and immutable distributed ledger, think about the auditability. Every agency would be able to pass an audit. Now that scares the Department of Defense to death because they can't pass an audit. But they always say, well, there's classified programs. Yeah, we can have a private blockchain for the classified stuff, or we could do everything off chain related to classified operations. But anything that is public, you could actually have fully auditable. I think the other thing is you look at how vulnerable a lot of our computing networks have been, to hacks. People think a lot of times of Bitcoin, for example, as a product, instead of what it really is. It's a completely different computing architecture that establishes trust in a different way. It moves forward without truly resolving trust. And I think that's one of the problems, even for legislators. They know enough to know how a centralized computing system works, and that has an appeal of a central database. They want the ability to filter transactions. And, some of the people are benign. They don't get all the implications of that. But some of them, that's why they like the central bank digital currency system, because you could link it to a social credit system and truly make everything manipulative. You could use it for coercion and control. And so that whole range of things is what we're fighting about today. I think it is high stakes. There are people that get the implications and are hard set against it. There are people that get the implications, and that's why they're for it. And it is, why you see the power struggle going on. It isn't necessarily where the population is. It's not even necessarily where the party is. But Elizabeth Warren is for things like central bank digital currency and opposed to crypto because of the implications.
Yeah, that's interesting. Then if you expand on that just one step further and you take it to one person, one vote, we obviously have some major issues within our voting infrastructure at many different levels, and every state, has different timing and how they actually count the votes. Florida, we're both Chip and I are fortunate to be in the great state of Florida, where they report as soon as the voting is done, they report the count. But they're trying to change that too. There's a lot of impact, with the vote by mail, which is, has a lot of fraud built into it. What about one person, one vote, put all voting on the blockchain? And
I love the idea, and I think the way that we could do it, and there's a guy from Delaware, I'm drawing a blank on his name, that really has written, thoroughly on this about corporate governance and using distributed ledger technology to do proxy votes. So get the shareholder votes instead of, there's two proxy advisory firms that dominate. So how's our capital markets so controlled? Most people don't vote their shares. And so these proxy advisors are voting on behalf of all the shareholders a lot of times. And, frankly, neither of them is controlled by an American corporation. They're, one's Deutsche Börse and one's Canadian. But nevertheless, you look at the vulnerability for votes to be avoided just in shares. I think if we can prove this out in a major way in another forum, we could get it into the election system. I really, if you look at the underlying technology, you would have instantaneous real-time auditability, and it would be immutable. And, I think, but the same people that oppose voter ID would be even more opposed to an idea that you have an immutable distributed ledger that can show the record of who voted and where they voted, how they voted, and everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So one last question before we get out of here. So the Federal Reserve has been raising rates, basically collapsing the job market. I think that was John Kennedy who cornered them on that one of those hearings where with the chair. Their main tenet is to kind of like look after the currency, make sure that's okay, the job market, everything else. Do you think we will see an appetite to actually audit the Federal Reserve and find out what the balance sheet looks like and take a look inside, since they failed so miserably? And if you look at, and the founders really never intended to have a sort of a central type of a bank. And because they were looking, Andrew Jackson was the last one that got rid of it after 20 years after their banking charter ran out. But this has been running way too long. It's not, we took it off the gold standard in 71. What are your thoughts about an audit? And do you see an appetite there for a different type of a system or an introduction of something new?
There is growing support for the audit, the Fed bill. I think Thomas Massie carries the bill in the House. Ron Paul made it famous with both audit the Fed and in the Fed. And, Massie's focused on auditing it. I've got a bill that would build on the audit of the Fed, and it pulls the regulatory component of the Federal Reserve, the body that just denied a charter a Fed account to Custodia Bank, as an example, pull them out of the Federal Reserve system directly and put them into, you can call it still the Federal Reserve if you want, where you put them on appropriations, and then there would be clear accountability for every dollar that they get. They would be just like any other bank regulator in that sense. But if you look at even the monetary policy, we, had conversations with the Federal Reserve, with Chairman Powell back in 2020. And, there were lots of us who were opposed to closing the economy. Nevertheless, it got closed. But there were a whole lot of us that, like in my case, I really think that the Federal Reserve may never get enough credit for the interventions that they did in March and April to create stability. I mean, there was no buy side for municipal bonds. I mean, like no buy side at any price. So there was like a margin call death spiral. I talked to one big fund that had $500 million of cash just consumed with margin calls in about 10-day period. So the Federal Reserve created this municipal liquidity fund. It provided a backstop, and they didn't even have to tap a lot of it. The idea that they did made the market function again, and now there was a buyer and seller, so you could actually have price discovery. But then they just found the power too attractive, I guess, and they kept buying, and they loaded up their balance sheet. They went from $4 trillion to roughly $9 trillion on their balance sheet, and that's a true economic distortion. So I created the Sound Money Caucus in July of 2020 to say, this is really a problem, what you're doing. Please stop. And it is going to cause inflation. And of course, they said, no, it won't cause inflation. I said, it will. And they're like, well, okay, but it won't hit consumers. They're like, it will. And they're like, okay, but it'll be transitory. It's not going to be transitory. No one's even pretending anymore. And I think it's hard for people to think like, these people know the implications of it. You have a PhD in economics. I have an MBA. I know if I know, they know. But they would go say public statements that would, oh, what do you mean? And it really is hard to believe. And, they've created a whole phrase around this on the left with, Bernie Sanders, economic advisor, wrote a book called Modern Monetary Theory. And it's the idea that you can just print more money. Well, yeah, you can print more money, but it doesn't guarantee that you can buy the same amount of stuff with the money. That's what historically we've called inflation. You call it whatever you want, but it's wrecking our economy. And the companies and banks and individuals that didn't navigate that rapid decline and rapid rise in rates are getting wrecked. I think it really poses a systemic risk to our financial system. And the question is, why would they do that? Did they do that on purpose? And, hopefully we'll find out. We really need a good accounting of that. And if we don't have audits, how are we going to know?
Exactly. Well, I know I know we're at time. I know Zober had said, thank you, Congressman, for your service. Yeah, we thank you for your service as well, and all the great things you're doing inside of Congress, really pushing forward to benefit the American people on the baseline as far as what it looks like for crypto. So a big thanks again. I still think the crypto taxonomy really needs to be dusted off and never even made it in a committee. It never got a voting committee. So I think it's time to at least dust that off, and let's take another good look at that. Jeff, I'll let you know the word, and then we can find out.
Appreciate, Congressman, appreciate you coming on with us again. It's always a pleasure having you here with us. Great to hear updates in terms of what you're working on, and hopefully to see some real positives coming out of Congress going into the next season.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. And just think of the progress from when I talked about initially trying to get to the point of the Token Taxonomy Act to now we have a digital assets subcommittee. So we've made real progress. Chairwoman Maxine Waters, when she was chair, created a task force that started looking into it, and Chairman McHenry created a whole subcommittee on it. So I think there's a meaningful support from Congress to get something done on this. I do hope we have a coming together of something that'll really continue to build momentum for our markets.
Yeah, we're looking forward to 2024. And we know we're going to have great outcomes, and we'll see some great legislation actually being passed right through to the president at that point.
Yeah, let's hope. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Take care.
Appreciate you.
One.
All right.
Appreciate
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
That was fantastic.
Chip, that was awesome.
My dog was driving me crazy the whole time. The good thing I have that filter crisp, Jeff, because he's all going crazy today. I was like, should I have him in the studio today? Well, yeah.
Julius,
fantastic interview. I know that he was wearing his West Point shirt as well, because that's his alma mater, and also he was heading off to commissioning, I think, of some officers.
Within the OTC or the
OTC, yeah, with an OTC. Yeah, and he was saying
the OTC, or is it? So what is not the OTC?
not OTC, RTC, ROTC.
RTC, ROTC.
OTC. We
I
got
know there's
OTC
an
on the
OTC
brain.
in there. Couldn't remember the R. I get blinded by OTC.
Michael
So, man,
Otto.
that was great. What is this one here? Warren, don't forget to pick out a Yeti on your way out.
Yeah, listen,
They're only
the Yetis,
125 XRP.
we actually had one day with no Yeti sales, which is weird because it's been pretty consistent. So, guys, we'll drop that in there as well. But you know, I think we learned a lot today in this interview. It was really great. And again, Jeff and I had so many questions in there. But again, I thought the questions were really well handled. And it's really kind of nice to know that, you know, legislation seems to be on the way. And look, I mean, people do get a little bit annoyed saying, hey, it's not going to happen. Listen, man, it's designed to move slow.
Yeah, it is. It's like moving a ship. So if you're moving a freighter, or, you know, even those cruise ships, well, the cruise ships move pretty quick, but those freighters, they have to move little by little. And it's the same thing within Congress. If Congress moved like a speedboat, we'd be in ultimate chaos. I don't even know where we'd be right now. You know, and it also shows, you know, a balance of the party system. Sometimes it doesn't turn out exactly as planned because there's a lot of lobbyist mechanism in the background. But, you know, I thought talking about and seeing, you know, Davidson's new initiative, which is to remove the chair position of the SEC, because that chair position has been ultimately corrupted. You know, so we've got to get that chair position. We've got to get rid of it, make it an executive position, have that executive answer to the board, to the commissioners, the way it was meant to be. And, you know, it's interesting because you brought up what's going on, you know, within, you know, different elements of government. So it's not just the SEC that's corrupted. It's across the board. There's too many unelected bureaucrats, and look how they're directly impacting the crypto space, Chip. It's been brutal. He did bring up the Maxine Waters introduced. They put a commission together to discuss. You remember that? That was passed through. That was one of the things passed through the Financial Services Committee. But so there's conversation, discourse. But where's the appetite? Because look where we're at today, Chip, with the blue team, and even you know, the congressman was mentioning this. Where do they go? They're quiet. Even Darren Soto, you're not hearing from him because the administration has a different initiative today. Control.
Badass Davidson Yeti. There you go.
That's right. We should have present him with a badass Davidson.
Now I'll get Shermanator on here for a Q&A. Yeah, that'll probably happen. Never. But no, I thought too. I loved how the approach to the Federal Reserve as well, as far as the audit. Sounds like there's an appetite that actually may move through as well, because I think that, especially when you have the massive failure of the Federal Reserve, and you know, it's so funny that, you know, Congressman Davidson brought up the whole thing about this. Well, don't worry, it's not going to cause inflation. It is. It's not going to cause inflation, and then boom, we get massive inflation. I mean, even when Trump left, it was like a 1.3 or 1.4. It had already started, right? It wasn't at zero, it wasn't a flat line, but then it moved. I mean, of course, you redefine and move the goalposts of how it's defined, and that's why we end up with a 3.3 unemployment, which is insanely corrupt as well. So you can modify the numbers to say, look what a great job we're doing. But if you listen to the news or you just are conscious, you'll know that otherwise, right? And see that, well, my money doesn't buy what it bought. And that's something he brought up, is the fact that, yeah, your dollar doesn't spend the way it used to. It's everything's way more expensive and inflated.
Yeah, you print it into oblivion. Who was that clip that we played the other day? You said, well, we can just keep printing money, you know? And
yeah, that was the ex-chair of the Federal Reserve. That was
right. Just keep printing money. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. We can always just solve it pretty simply. I mean, we don't have to worry about doing any sort of like due diligence. We don't have to worry about that. But that was Greenspan. We can throw that clip up there if you want to. Let's listen to that again.
U.S. Treasury bonds still safe to invest in?
Very much so. I think this is not an issue of credit rating. The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. So there is zero probability.
So I don't know what happened on my side, Jeff, but something this video just killed me.
Greenspan. Yeah, it's
the video locked everything up. I don't know why, but it just
Yeah, that was bizarre to see that. But man, Michael Murphy brings up a solid point, and I think he's accurate on this one. Paying our bills and crypto legislation should not be a partisan issue. It should be completely nonpartisan. However, the unfortunate part about it, and Congressman Davidson mentioned this, which is still shocking to me. Well, it's not shocking, but it's kind of expected that there are members of the blue team that are pro crypto, but under today's climate, they won't come out and say anything, right? Because now it's the woke climate, and they're marching to the orders. And silence is violence. I mean, if you're going to be silent on an issue, and you're not going to stand up to your party, and you're going to let your party steamroll these horrible initiatives, then you're participating in those initiatives by remaining silent. It's sorry to have to break that, to these congressmen that are pro crypto. If you're going to allow your party to destroy the economy and turn things to a centralized digital currency that is going to destroy our privacy, and you're going to remain silent on that, you might as well leave the party, because if you don't believe in that, how could you side with them on anything else? It makes no sense. You take away people's freedoms and liberties, and you take away their First Amendment and Second Amendment rights, then what do you stand for at the end of the day? These congressional representatives, you cannot be a Democrat at that point, or you cannot align yourselves with the Democrat Party if you're against that part of it, that you don't want to see them, remove those privacy rights and those freedoms and liberties. But yet that's what they're doing. They're remaining silent on it. It's a travesty. It's an absolute travesty. Chip, this goes beyond crypto. This goes to every aspect of society, with the Fed out of control, with everything out of control. And now, not to get into this subject, but we saw something happen in New York where someone was out of control on a subway train, and he was held back by the passengers on the train, and that individual ended up dying. You know what? He put himself in that predicament, but because of our crazy woke politicians, who they're siding with? They're siding with the instigator that caused the problem, and they're not siding with the passengers that were there minding their own business. They're siding with the violent offender. And this is such a travesty, because they're siding with those that want to take away our cryptocurrency. They're siding with those that want to push innovation offshores. They're siding with those who want to take away our privacies and our rights. It's so clear, Chip. It's just so clear.
I thought silence was golden. I think that's just the movie theater, though.
Only in the movie theater.
Yeah, but they took
Depends
it a little too.
Which movie you go to see, what theater.
It took it a little too far. But Michael O2 says, "Hey Jeff, is it true that you sacked the Yetis for the Pepe pump?" No, that's not true at all, Jeff. Is it?
The Pepe pump.
Yeah, the whole Pepe thing is like crazy, and I mean, great. I mean, if you want to join a meme coin and you make some money, great. I personally don't look at that that way, but we had like one day where he didn't have like a Yeti sale, which has been weirder because they've been very steady. We're at 30% mint. That means we have 70% to go, guys. I dropped it in down there, which is the you guys can go over there and mint it. It's 125 XRP. Go ahead and grab yourself one. It's great when you guys tweet them out too. If you do pick one up, tweet it out. But yeah, the badass Yeti is alive and well over there on xrp.cafe. But Jeff, the other thing I thought too about when we talked about this legislation, but that montage we played of Warren Davidson just hammering Gensler, and he's like, he couldn't answer any question throughout the whole hearing. It was like a yes or no question. There was actually, I was actually going to edit one piece together where there's a part where he's looking up like this, like, and I was like, just wanted to do that for every answer. Like, so you just like ask him a question, you just feel like looking around. But I was like, no, let's keep it true to form. We can goof around on that another time. But I thought that when it came to the crypto legislation, it does sound like, because we do have this new subcommittee, it sounds like we're getting there. It's taking a little bit slower. I mean, one question I thought about asking as well that we had on there that we didn't get to is, was there any pressure at all? The fact that the entire rest of the world is positive on crypto, and the only one on the island is the US. And I think it has a lot to do with sometimes people who, the donors who donate to campaigns. You look at Brad Sherman, it's like pretty heavily skewed in the banking side of things and this threat of decentralization that poses to not only banks but also to, I think, governments. I think governments around the world too. It poses that threat. You could actually run a government on a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, where everybody brings it back to what you asked, Jeff, that one person, one vote, ensuring that what we do on the blockchain. I mean, I thought it was great that you brought that up as well, and I love the way you answered that.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, and it was Ray Run actually, put that in the Q&A over here in the questions. But I think that's so critical, and this is where we take and the congressman actually brought that up also, that there's so much more utility, that the first utility is payments. That's what cryptocurrency is. That's what the blockchain is all about. The first utility was payments, but it's more than that, so much more than that, as we're seeing. And even within Bitcoin, the initial concept was actually to, and all the Bitcoin maxis thought that with Bitcoin, they were going to leave the financial infrastructure, and they were going to get rid of banking, and they were going to do all these things. But in reality, what it can do is it really changes, how everybody banks. It changes the fundamentals,
Right.
and moving money and all of that. You can't get rid of the infrastructure. Chip, you and I, talked about most people don't want to do, they don't want their thumb drives, they don't want their ledger, they don't want their codes, they don't want all that. They still want a third-party support mechanism. So those third-party support mechanisms are already there with the Coinbases of the world and the Krakens and all of that. Those could potentially still be the new banks and the new banking infrastructure. Well, we still have no idea where it's going to end, but this, man, it's so critical right now. We're at such a critical point in our history between what's happening in the U.S. and, just as you had mentioned, I wish we would have asked him, how do you compare where the rest of the world's going? It puts us in the back seat. We're no longer in the driver's seat, and that there you go.
There you go. I was reading some of the comments here. There's a lot of interesting comments. Someone said that where was it? Oh gosh, now I lost it. Someone's walking around Buckingham Palace with XRP signs. Oh, there it is, right there. With XRP signs. There you go. I mean,
Which two guys? Us?
Well, not us, dude. Well, also too.
That'd be cool.
Also too, the best part of that hearing too is when Warren Davidson asked, "Hey, is XRP a security?" He's like, "Well, we have discussions and active litigation." Well, you're in litigation because you're alleging it is a security. Like, come on, man. I mean, could you just answer the question? Seriously. It's incredible, right? I mean, you're in litigation because you're alleging it's a security. Well, I mean, we're in discussions, and people took that remark, Jeff, discussions and litigation, to mean like, oh, discussions. Ooh, I know what they're talking about, a settlement. Like, people thought, like, you see, discussions, a settlement. Well, there's always going to be talking between two parties. It's part of what the judge early days said, get together, have some times to have this conversation and move and have these active conversation. It doesn't necessarily mean they're working on that. It'd be great if they were in a sense, but not happening.
Chip, here's one from Mike John. Guys, what's your thoughts on Gensler saying in a video when he was a teacher that XRP and 3/4 of crypto ain't a security? How is John Deaton and XRP lawyers not showing this in court? I'm sure that they have brought that up at some point, and I think it's been referenced, his statements previous to, but that was him as a private citizen. So, he might have a different appreciation. But we also know that, going back to what Chair Gensler, has done, the one thing that I'll agree with Gary Gensler on is that he said, if you want legislation, the Congress has to pass it. And that's the only part of everything that he said that I would agree with. And even, Warren Davidson brought that up, that it has to go through Congress. But Congress didn't have the appetite. They don't have the appetite to pass the legislation. So what are they doing? They're pushing their, not their authority, but their responsibility. A lot of the congressmen are pushing their responsibility onto an unelected bureaucrat and pointing the finger at him and saying, how come you haven't come up with the appropriate regulation, and it's not up to him. All Chair Gensler can do is look at the laws that are on the books and regulate accordingly. And it's an unknown variable. Chair Gensler says it's clear. Everyone else knows it's not. He's been brought in front of hearing in front of Congress. There seems to be a bit of a disconnect over there, and so we have those in Congress that want to do. We have those in Congress that just want to get their payday. They're making $180,000 a year. It's easy street. Somehow they all leave as multimillionaires. They're in for the money, somewhat the power. And that's unfortunate. It really is. They're looking for the career, just sitting around and doing nothing, as elected officials to appease the unelected bureaucrats.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, there's this comment. Rough Rican says he spent his money on buying a badass Yeti instead of a Peppy. There you go. I'm not saying that's a bad decision. That's a pretty good condition, but we appreciate it. I love the sentiment there. XRP Blinder says, hey, we should have asked them if there's real consequences for not answering questions, or if this is all truly a dog and pony show. Listen, you are under oath, okay? And this is what Byron Donaldson, congressman from the west coast of Florida, which is another great congressman we need to have on here.
We're going to reach out to him. We're going to reach out to a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, so it was great when he had asked Gensler too that you were under in the 2016. You were the chief financial officer for the Hillary Clinton campaign, and he's like, he goes, and he reminded him, you are under oath. He said he didn't know anything about it. Well, I think we need to find out if he knew anything about it. I think we need to find out if his signature signed some checks or money was released for that Alpha Bank hoax and also the other, the Steele dossier, right? He said, I was unaware of that. Everyone's unaware. They have real shady memories. But you know what's funny is like the FOIA request, freedom of information. Let's see what that looks like. Let's see what that looks like. Let's, trust but verify. Let's see if in fact that is true. I seem to somewhat doubt that, Jeff.
Yeah, I agree.
Look at that beautiful Yeti right there.
That awesome, beautiful Yeti. It's awesome, Jim D. Nice. Crypto Eddie, what is going on? Appreciate you being here with us. We did a great interview with Crypto Eddie. Actually, we were on her show. And that was, when did we do that? Last Saturday? That was really cool. That was a lot of fun. It's always cool to sit down and talk to Crypto Eddie. And
it was really fantastic. More. And by the way, that question about Warren and Shermanator, Brad Sherman. That was from Crypto Eddie. I'd asked her like, hey, what any questions? And that was one of the questions that she had. And just to keep the interview going, I mean, I meant to circle back after and say that was one of her questions. And everybody had a lot of great questions. Hey, people were saying, ask the senator. We'll ask the representative from it's a House of Representatives. But yeah, we look forward to that interview. When is that interview dropping, by the way? I think it should be dropping soon. I mean, the best bits, right? So it'll probably be edited down to like a 6-8 minute type of a thing. Because Jeff and I have a tendency to talk and ramble, right? So that does sort of happen.
It was so difficult with the congressman to keep it short. So he just had the keep it very let the spotlight be put on the congressman. But we're looking forward to a lot of other great interviews coming up here in the short future. There'll be a lot of great things. The Shermanator. It'd be awesome if we could bring the Shermanator on. I would love to put him in the hot seat and just hammer him with.
Go ahead. I'll be the Shermanator. So I hate crypto, and that's my Gary Gensler. You're doing a fantastic job. I love you. He got that really like sort of Joker face. But you see, like he was like, "I'm just my own opinion, but you're doing great, dude. I love you." It was so embarrassing in that financial shoot. I was like, it's such an embarrassment. I mean, there's
so many of them that are just.
There's so many of them, and they're like, go ahead, keep building your anti-crypto army there. Oh
my God.
I'm careful not to say they're always out of choosing my words carefully, but yeah, Senator Warren, be careful because we've been building a crypto army since 2009. So good luck with that. But it's in useless Massachusetts where the people are brain dead as can be, and they might as well live in Beverly Hills district. But I knew California was done when I saw that Scott Baio, who played Chachi on Happy Day says, dude, I've lived here my entire life. It's not safe anymore. And so many celebrities are actually leaving California because it's not a safe place anymore. I mean, first of all, San Francisco's turned into a death zone. There's like feces and stuff. And it used to be a beautiful city. I traveled there many, many years, even maybe 3-4 years ago, a convention that I used to go to. They moved it. You know, it's bad if they move it to Las Vegas, Jeff. Like with all the debauchery in Las Vegas, you know that it's bad if they move it out of San Francisco. And the guy who ran it was a 1960s sort of hippie and, hate Ashbury sort of a guy, really cool dude. But he's like, okay, even this is like, there's too much, man. The needles and the feces and everything else. California, if you want to look at failure, just look at California, look at New York, and you just look at one coast, the other coast, and everything from New York all the way up onto the top there by Canada, that's also lost. It's a complete, the taxes, the legislation, the debauchery is incredible. It's just horrendous.
Which area?
So
You talking about Canada?
that too. Well,
All
you
the
think
states
about,
along the border of Canada.
well, Jeff, if you think about it, right? So we thought like, well, if you, this was something that Robert Kennedy Jr., right? So you think about the fact that he was running on the Democrat side, but he brought up a really good point that, it used to be if you lived in somewhere like Russia or you lived in some sort of a communist state, you could be canceled, right? They could take your bank account, they could seize all your assets. In Venezuela, they would just take your land, they take your business and say, yep, it belongs to us now. You think like, wow, that's just those countries. But then we saw that happen in Canada where, so JP Morgan Chase seized roughly around or debanked around 19 organizations. The most famous one is Kanye West, right? Didn't like what he was saying or whatever. What do you agree or not? All of a sudden, he wasn't banked there anymore. Then you had 19 other organizations, mostly for their conservative or Christian type beliefs. They were also debanked. And we're like, well, that can't happen here. Well, it's happened here and it's happening here. So if you think that a bank can do it, a private organization, how do you think the government's going to do it? Warren Davidson so eloquently talked about that dystopian sort of world we would live in because they would control every part of it. Like, and when they come out and frontline it with the, we're so concerned about your privacy. But they always telegraph the one part they know that they should talk about, but the one part that they're going to totally ignore, right? So they're not concerned about it at all, Jeff. They have zero thoughts about that. It's crazy.
That's right. Hey, I just want to put up Ken James here. He said, your opinions aren't fact. I was like, what is he talking about? Your opinions aren't fact. He said, you know nothing about Canada. You should stop while you're ahead. So I say, we put a rider on that because how are the Leafs doing against the Panthers?
Oh, Jeff. Oh,
That's what I wanna
wait,
know.
Jeff. Wait, Jeff. What did you just say, Jeff? Whoa. Oh my gosh, Jeff's getting a timeout here. Whoa, boo.
Ooh.
Holy cow.
Boom.
Yeah, so
that's enough said right there.
No, if you want to look at what dictatorship looks like, look no further than Canada. If you want to look at like mandating and telling everybody they're going to be strapped down, they're going to get and then you went ahead and because you had your truckers, they were protesting, right? And what happened? Debanked them. So, by the way, I told the story often about how my family lives in Canada. Most of it lives in Canada, my family. So, only my grandfather was the one that was smart and came down to the U.S. So,
right. How many Canadians play on the Panthers?
Doesn't matter. It's a U.S.
Right,
country.
It's a U.S. team. It's still a U.S. team.
And the U.S. team wins it almost every year.
Florida.
How disappointing is that when you have, what is it, 5 or 6 Canadian teams and we win the cup every year? But not every year. But I would say this though: if you ever get a chance to go to Toronto and go to the Hockey Hall of Fame, it's really a phenomenal experience. It's in an old bank. You walk into the bank vault and you see all the original Stanley Cups there, just to see them. Growing up watching, being a huge hockey fan. I mean, I obviously grew up outside of Buffalo. I grew up right across the bridge from Canada. Niagara Falls there. Spent a lot of time in Canada. I do love Canada. We do talk about it, but I love Canada. I always have. Like I said, visited relatives in Canada. For us, I was just driving across the bridge, and as kids, we didn't know we were in a different country. We were just like, oh, cool. You go over the Rainbow Bridge. Oh, there's Niagara Falls. Next thing you know, you're Ottawa, and it's like, it's just not I love Canada. Like I said, my Hungarian family came over and immigrated to Canada, and my grandfather came down here. So we talk about it, but we'll criticize the U.S. too. We're rough on the U.S. too. The U.S. has a lot of problems,
especially California.
Especially California. We're like we're equal opportunity opinionators here. So we call it as we see it. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're not. Sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's not. We love when there's dissent and when you guys agree with us. I'm going to say that there's 3 Canadians, Jeff, and that's probably wrong. There's probably 3 Americans that play on there, but
so he said there's the answer right there. It said 15.
All right, well, that's still not the whole.
But the question is, where do they live though? Are they now living in the U.S., being that they play on an American team, on a U.S. team? Or do they go back to Canada? Wonder. That'd be an interesting one too. Find that
Jeff,
out.
I'll say this: some of the best comedians in the world, and this bar none, come from Canada. Canadians have the best sense of humor. A lot of great comedians that they've come. You think they're in the U.S., right? You think they're like a U.S. comic, but a lot of them are Canadian. So there's a lot of great things about Canada, especially
Toronto,
Toronto's fantastic.
Montreal. Windsor used to be great. We used to go to Windsor for dinner and lunch all the time from Detroit.
So did I. When I lived in Detroit, awesome. I would go to Windsor all the time too. I'd actually, when I used to drive back to visit, my family, I would drive across Canada, right?
Yeah, me too. So you go up the 401.
Yep, it was a lot shorter, and of course, I'd get a walnut crunch back in the day over at Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons' best export, but again, also a Canadian who played for the Buffalo Sabres, who unfortunately met his demise on a bridge going a little too fast in a sports car. But a lot of great things about Canada. So Jim D says, Jim D says Canada is being taken over by immigrants fleeing their own nations. Yeah, Asian and Muslim. That's true. That's true.
It's true. It all started in Vancouver and Toronto and Windsor.
Jeff, I got to bail. I got to get out of here.
I do too.
Let's get out of here, guys.
Chip, this was awesome. I want to give a quick shout out to everybody that joined us. You guys are the best and the brightest in all of crypto YouTube space. A big shout out and thank you to Congressman Warren Davidson for joining us here on the chain. As always, we appreciate that.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. We'll see you guys on the next one. Chip and Jeff. Ow!
Are you down with OTC? Please like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when the next video drops.